Hello, everyone. This is Robert Paylor, former Cal rugby player and now executive director of the Big C Society. Together with us today are Joe Roof, the president of the Big C Society, Caitlin Leverin-Smith, the co-liaison director for women's swimming and diving on the Big C Society board of directors, and our special guest today, Natalie Coughlin Hall, formerly of Cal women's swimming and diving, a 12-time Olympic medalist and a 20-time world championship medalist for USA Swimming, and now a vintner and co-founder of Gaderian Wines. For the benefit of our listeners, Natalie, I'm going to start with a little background on you. Natalie is one of the most decorated female swimmers in American history and the most decorated Cal women's swimming alumni. She was a standout athlete at Cal, winning 11 individual NCAA national championships and a 12th as a member of the Cal relay team. She was named NCAA Swimmer of the Year 3 times, was a 2-time recipient of the Honda Sports Award for swimming and diving, and was named the 2002 and 2003 Sports Illustrated College Female Athlete of the Year. After graduating from Cal in 2005, Natalie's success has earned her the Swimmer of the Year award once, American Swimmer of the Year award 3 times, and induction into the Cal Hall of Fame. She has won a total of 60 medals in major international competition, 25 gold, 22 silver, and 13 bronze, spanning the Olympics, the World Championships, the Pan-Pacific Championships, and the Pan-American Games. Now, I'm out of breath out of an introduction like that. But before we get going, Caitlin, is there anything else you'd like to add to introduce Natalie to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like hard to wrap your head around, I think, those stats, just like saying them. It's truly amazing. So it's always fun and such an honor to be able to introduce Natalie. It's like, I think especially fun for me because growing up, any swimmer, I think in the early 2000s had that like maybe iconic Speedo poster and like idolized Natalie and had her like plastered on my wall, as someone I kind of aspired to be in my own Olympic dreams. And then it was like, every little kid's dream come true to be able to come to Cal and train with my idol. And then, I think maybe even better, just like become friends. And the number of things I learned from Natalie over the years, she's just truly just someone of just like incredible strength, incredible determination. I just admire her in so many ways. And it's also been really fun because, we go from like, she's like childhood idol, like poster on the wall to like friends at Cal and roommates at the Olympics in 2012. And now both having kids, and we're not talking about swimming at all. In fact, I'm like, hey, my kid's doing this weird downward dog thing, but I know your kid did it too. So, and just kind of bonding over completely new life experiences. So it's really fun to be able to introduce her and to hear more of her story today.
Caitlin, that was such a nice introduction. I really, really appreciate it. And I was going to say, you have to mention that we were roomies in 2012. So I'm glad that was part of the intro.
Awesome, Natalie. Well, we're so excited to have you here today. Welcome to the podcast. As we start off our podcast here, I want to start by delving into your career as a swimmer. Before we go into the post-sports professional career, let's explore that remarkable career you've had as a swimmer. Can you tell us the story of how you got into swimming and then how you ended up at Cal?
It was a pretty simple story how I got into swimming in the first place. My parents were just responsible parents, got me into swim lessons at a really young age. I think I started at the YMCA and the Mommy and Me classes when I was 8 months or 9 months or something. And the first house that we lived in had a pool. And so water safety was really, really important. And I always really enjoyed the swim lessons. And when I was in first grade, so I think I was 6, we moved from Vallejo to Benicia, so just the neighboring town here in the Bay Area. And to meet new kids in my new town, I joined the local swim team and had been doing it ever since. So I was just much better in the water than I was on land at that age. And I stuck with it. I ended up swimming competitively for almost 30 years, which is nuts.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's keep going there too. From your young swimming career to how you got to Cal, can you also describe that journey for you?
Yeah, so it was God, it seems like such a long journey. So when I was 6 is when I started swimming. And I, looking back on it, I think I was better than I remember, but I was good and extremely competitive. But I always thought I was kind of, pardon the pun, with swimming big fish in a little pond. I was in the North Bay of the Bay Area and on smaller teams until I was 13, and that's when I got on the bigger team in Concord, California, and started really competing on the national level. So 13 was a big year for me. I went from just an age group swimmer who made the regional all-stars and was really good on the age group level, but I transitioned to junior nationals and actually finaled at my first nationals all when I was 13 years old. And I still remember being on the pool deck for the final of the 200 freestyle. I was in lane 1. It was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And the announcer was, they list your name and your stats. And my stat was I was 13 years old. In lane 1, 13-year-old Natalie Coughlin. And that's one of those memories that is seared in my brain. So from 13 to 17 or so, those are my high school years. So 13, it was 1996, turning 14, I guess. So right when 13 or so, that was when becoming an Olympian became a possibility. Before then, it was always a dream. It was an aspirational goal, but a 6-year-old has no idea what it takes to go to the Olympics, nor does a 6-year-old have the ability to understand the process, like the actual process, but then the mental and physical and emotional process of it all. But 13 was when I really sat down and started goal setting, like, this is how I'm going to get to the Olympics. And the goal ultimately was to get to the 2000 Olympic Games, which, spoiler alert, I didn't make it. But that was the best thing that could have happened to me, was missing that first Olympic team. And after the Olympic trials in 2000, when I got 4th, you need to get 1 or 2, first or second in an individual event. I got 4th in the 200 IM. After missing that Olympic team I immediately went to Cal for my freshman year. And that was the best thing that happened to me because I've said this before. I don't think I would say arrogant, but extremely confident in my abilities and very strong-willed. And I think had I made the Olympic team prior to setting foot on campus at Cal, I would have been too stubborn to really accept Terry McKeever's style of coaching. I needed to be knocked down off my pedestal and really start from scratch, I think, to absorb just her genius. She is a fantastic coach who was very different than the environment that I came from. And I needed something different, and I needed to be kind of at a really low level to accept it, I think.
When I was doing my research, I also read about this period before you got to Cal and your early swimming career at age 16. You had already set 3 national high school records. You're pegged as a contender for the Sydney Olympics, and then you tore your labrum. And I bring this up because I'm curious, did this setback cause you to start thinking about life after sports? And was it a factor in that decision to go to Cal?
Yes, that's very insightful. Yes. So I was on this like rocket ship to making my goal of the Olympic team. I set a bunch of national high school records. I broke the American record. Like I think I was 16, maybe I was 15, 16. Either way, I was really young. I broke the American record in the 100 back. And then I had this amazing US Open where I won 5 events. And that was about a year and a half, maybe a little bit longer, maybe like 20 months out of the Olympic games, Olympic trials. So I was like getting so close to my goal. And then, like every swimmer gets shoulder issues, especially tendinitis. Like we see that as no big deal. Like if you don't have tendinitis, like you're really not trying. I joke about that, but there's a lot of wear and tear on the body. It's like long-term stuff. So I had that, but one day after a really tough practice, I woke up in the middle of the night and I could not lift my arm. And so I ended up tearing my labrum, which that's all like the internal rotation, what you need for swimming. And so it was frustrating because I was so close to my goal, and the way that I hurt myself was working really hard and pushing through the pain. Like all the things that you're taught as an athlete and a young athlete is like no pain, no gain. And I took that very literally and seriously. And so, mentally as a 16-year-old, that was so tough. Like I was very stressed out about that. And I saw myself getting so close to my goals and then saw it also getting taken away from me. So that's when I really started thinking like, hey, this could be taken away from me at any point in my life. So I better get a good education and have a backup plan. Like, not that I ever thought I was going to be a professional athlete, because that didn't exist really in the late 90s, especially for swimming. But I knew that I have to have things in my life outside of swimming that fulfill me mentally, emotionally, spiritually, so that my mental health was better. I don't think those were the terms I thought about it at the time, but looking back, like that was kind of the subconscious decision, was to make sure that my life was well-rounded so that I was more of a whole person than just an athlete. And that being said, I was always really competitive in academics prior to this and prior to college. But that's when those goals kind of solidified in my psyche.
I also want to spend a little more time talking about these setbacks and the forms of injuries, because I read that it wasn't the only time that you face a setback. It's something that almost every athlete's probably going to face over the course of their career. I read that you also suffered a shoulder injury just before the U.S. trials for the 2008 Olympics. And then rather than get surgery immediately and forgo competing in the Olympics, you went on to compete, and you became the first American woman to win 6 medals at one Olympics and the first woman ever to win back-to-back Olympic gold in the 100-meter backstroke. And then you underwent shoulder surgery to repair your injury. And that decision, which obviously worked out, seems like it could have gone very wrong, except for 1, wizardry from your training room staff, and 2, a lot of grit from you. Can you take us back to that decision to compete, including what was in your mind at that time, the calculus of the risk and reward and so forth, and then deconstruct any secret differences in your approach to preparation and competition compared to your peers that allowed you to win 12 Olympic medals for Team USA?
Yeah, so there wasn't a decision-making process, honestly. It happened, I think, a week before trials. And I'm still not entirely sure what happened, but I suspect it was in the weight room, doing a snatch, so an above head weightlifting. I honestly don't know what happened, but I broke the head of my humerus, and there was a chip about the size of a quarter floating around in the shoulder capsule. And to be honest, I didn't know it was broken. I knew it hurt. I knew it was swollen. But I also knew I was a week out of Olympic trials, so nothing was going to stop me from going to Olympic trials. And Caitlin could attest to this. When you're that close to the Olympic Games, you're going to do whatever you need to do to get there. And had that been a lesser event, yeah, I would have considered the long-term ramifications of, is this going to make me worse off in the long run? I would have gone through that risk analysis. But when it's Olympic Games, you're going to go, even if your arm's going to fall off. My arm wasn't going to fall off. It was one of those things where it hurt like hell when I wasn't swimming. But when I was actually swimming and racing, I didn't even feel it. And I thought at the time it was just a really bad case of tendonitis. I could tell it was swollen. I could tell it hurt. But I broke a few world records earlier that year. I was on the path to having a great Olympic Games. I wasn't going to not go. And then I, had this great Olympics, won 6 medals. And I thought taking time off, it would get better. I thought, hey, I'm going to take a long break and this tendonitis will take care of itself. And I think it was about 6 weeks after the Olympic Games where I got to the point where I couldn't put on a jacket. I couldn't wash under my arm when I showered. I couldn't go this movement. I was like, you know what? I think it might be more than tendonitis. And then something might be seriously wrong. And that's when I saw a doctor and they're like, yeah, you need to get this surgically removed. And the way that she described it, it's like having a rock in your shoe. So if you just have to go and take the rock out and it'll be so much better than keep running on, a giant pebble in your shoe. And then when she was in there, she realized that the subscap was all torn up. And so she ended up repairing that. So it was a pretty big injury that I minimized at the time, probably to protect myself, subconsciously, to protect myself mentally. And then also because it's the Olympic Games and we're going to do whatever we need to do to be successful there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I also want to talk about your approach to winning 12 Olympic medals, which is just insane to a lay person like me. Not, the physical approach, but really that mental approach, that emotional approach, the sensibilities that you gained. Can you deconstruct any secret differences that you took in your approach, maybe to that of your peers, to win 12 Olympic gold medals? And are there any elements from that approach to competing that you use in your work today?
Yeah, it's whenever you have a really big goal. And I mean, I didn't set out to, I didn't say, my first Olympic Games, I want to have 12 Olympic medals by the time, that's not how it worked for me. For me, at each Olympics, I went into events not assuming to medal, but knowing I had the ability and the capability to medal. So my first Olympic Games, I won 5, and I knew I was capable of winning those individual, the gold and the bronze and the 100 back and 100 free, and then the relays. And then when I got to Beijing, I didn't consider doing 6 events, honestly. The Tuner Diem was an event that I didn't practice before. I did it twice before the Olympic trials. Once at the Stanford Grand Prix, and then once at Janet Evans' invite. And at that meet was when I broke the American record. And that's when a lot of people were like, you should probably consider doing this event at the Olympics. And I was like, hell no, because it overlaps with the 100 back and then the relays. I have 5 events and there's semifinals and finals. I'm not going to add to my schedule. And then, enough people got into my ear where I went into trials and I was like, you know what, I'll do that 100 back, Tuner Diem, and 100 free at Olympic trials, and then I'll make a decision from there. Ended up making the team in all 3 events. And then I remember at the Olympic training camp sitting down with Terry McKeever. She was the assistant coach at Beijing. And then the head coach, Mark Schubert, and essentially begging to get out of one of the events, saying, okay, I can't do all 6. Take me off the 4x2 relay, or let me drop this event. And they basically said, no, you're going to do all 6. And I was like, okay, here we go. And at that Olympic Games, again, I went into it not saying I want to get 6 medals and be the first American to do that, or American female to do that. But I knew that I could medal in every single one of those events. And honestly, I really thought I could win gold in the IM. And at the time, had I practiced that event a little bit more, I probably could have. But that's the narcissist and the true competitor in me looking back, like, damn it, I got so close. I could have done so much better. But yeah, like I chipped away at it. So you just take one event at a time. When you have an 8-day meet like that, you have 15 sessions because the last day there's no morning session. So you just take each session at a time and you kind of map it out, and you get into the mindset by really visualizing, okay, session 3 is when I'm going to have the semifinal and then the final, and there will be an hour and a half in between. So I'll get into warm up at 30 minutes before this event, then I'll warm down, then I'll get a massage, then I'll get, and you really map out the details of each session and visualize how that's going to work. So that when inevitably there are some surprises, that you'll be able to deal with them, but you have a sense of how each session is going to go. And when you apply that to life and in anything else, you have this big goal. You just chip away at it a little bit at a time. And I've heard this metaphor, like you could eat a Buick if you just eat like little chunks at a time. It might take you 10 years to do it, and probably it's not very good for you, but you could do it, so a task, like how would I eat that Buick? That's impossible. You just have to eat a little bit at a time. That's, a crazy metaphor, but it's something that you could visualize, like something that seems impossible. You just have to do little bits at a time, and eventually you'll get there.
When I was doing my research, something that really struck out to me too is you're talking about focus and really being present and mindful when you're competing. And, when somebody's going through something really difficult and maybe even something monotonous, when it's just you and the black line at the bottom of the pool, when it can think like, I want to think of my favorite song right now. I'm just going to I'm going to zone out and just kind of go through this activity. You talked about, like zoning in and really focusing in on every little movement. Can you talk about that too? Because it's something that really struck me when I was doing my research.
Yeah. So, every swimmer can attest to this. I'm sure Caitlin can too, is especially in high school, you do anything to get out of your head when you're in swimming, because you're in the water 5 hours a day, and it's mentally exhausting on top of being physically exhausting, just not talking to other people, all the thoughts going in your head while you're going through this physical pain. It's really tough. So a lot of times I think people make the mistake to distract themselves with a song or daydreaming or doing this or that. And somewhere along the way in college, I realized, hey, if I stay super incredibly focused, not only do my practices get more efficient and I get more out of each practice, but it actually goes a lot faster. And when you're highly focused on a task, time doesn't really seem to make sense. But the main thing that I took out of it was I just got so much better after every practice, was when I was really thoughtful about what I was doing and why I was doing it. So a lot of times, a set would come, a coach or Terry would give us a set, and I would want to know why we're doing this set. And it's not because I was questioning, why are we doing this? This is stupid. Why are we doing this? Because I really want to know how this is going to get me closer to my goals. And so I could visualize that and internalize that and really take that and build upon each practice.
Mm-hmm. Caitlin, I know that you have a question along the Olympic experience. Would you like to ask that?
Yeah, absolutely. And before kind of jumping in there, it just made me think of, if our listeners or you guys have seen the movie Soul. I just recently watched it. The moonshine character talks about people who get in the zone, and it's totally like I was like, oh yes, we know what that thing is. So if you watch that movie, you might get a good laugh out of it.
Co-produced by our own Rochelle Federico.
Oh, yep. Really? Amazing. Even better. as I mentioned in the intro, we got to be roommates at the 2012 games, which was super fun. And I know I have like so many memories from the London games that stand out, from like small things of like going to and from the coffee cart together, or kind of like bigger moments in my mind, like the first time kind of seeing the competition pool and realizing, and like totally getting chills and realizing like I'm at the Olympic Games. But I'm curious if you can just share with us like what is it really like? Like I have these like very vivid experiences and moments in my mind, but just to like bring to life to our listeners, like what is it like to be at the Olympics, and what are some of those like really, standout memories from your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, the first Olympic Games, Athens for me was something that I had dreamt about since I was 6 years old. I was 21, I turned 22 during the Olympics. And I remember being overwhelmed by it all, just kind of feeling like I was in this haze. Like, I don't know, Caitlin, if you experienced the same thing, but I was just kind of in this mental haze the whole time. Like, holy crap, I'm actually here. Like, what is going on? And the pressure of the Olympics, and just, it's so big. It's similar to World Championships, but it's not. I just remember being in this haze, and that's the only way I could describe it. And that was actually a much smaller Olympic Games, which is probably nice for me as a newbie. There were 6,500 people in the stands at Athens versus Beijing. There's 18,000. And I think it was similar in London. Yeah, you're just overwhelmed, but it's so big. It's like a city in of itself. The village is a village. And one of the coolest things that I always tell people is the people watching. My favorite game to play at the Olympics is Guess the Athlete. And you could see like how people were chosen for their sport and how their sport has shaped their bodies. Like the crew athletes stand out, the runners stand out, the rhythmic gymnastics stand out, like the basketball player. Like you could pick out, like, I would bet that person's rugby, or I would guess that person's a swimmer. Swimmers are easy to tell, but that was one of my favorite things. And you could do that in the cafeteria. 10,000 athletes come through the cafeteria daily. And it's really cool people watching from people around the world with different backgrounds. And it's so cool. And fortunately, swimming has always been that first week of the Olympic Games. And so swimmers are really, really lucky in that they get to go to the Olympics, compete, and then they get to be spectators and after the fact, and go to other events and really enjoy the Olympics as a fan after all the hard work is done. So swimmers are very, very fortunate. This time around in Tokyo, who knows what's going to happen? I don't think athletes are going to be able to attend other athletic events, unfortunately, which is sad. But hopefully, the Olympics continue. At least, hopefully, people at least get to compete in Tokyo.
Yeah, I do hope so too. I think I remember playing that Guess the Athlete game. I can't remember if it was with you or maybe another teammate, but we were guessing the athlete and like wanted to confirm. And so we asked someone if they were a runner, and they were a race walker. And that's when I realized that race walking is the Olympic term and speed walking is what old ladies do at the park. And I remember like being kind of like schooled in that at the Olympic Village, by these like probably super elite race walkers. So
same with table tennis.
I'm sure you taught me that. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's not ping pong. It is table tennis. Yeah,
absolutely. So kind of, I guess on the like other side, I'm sure you've heard the metaphor of like, we climb up the mountain and we climb back down. And I'm just curious, like, if you can kind of talk through the experience of like, what is it like to come down the mountain, and what is it like to have your identity that was, from age 6 or 13, just like so wrapped up in being a swimmer and achieving these goals, and shifting that into maybe something real life and civilian like, and motherhood and these, kind of other things. Like, what's it like to kind of come back down the mountain on the other side of the games?
Oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack with that. I remember making my first like national, like the top level national team in 1999, and that was Pan Pacifics. And I remember talking to a lot of the veterans on the team, and they would talk about post-Olympic depression. Oh, you get really depressed after the Olympic Games. And I always remember not understanding what that meant. And then, I didn't make my first Olympic team to 2004. And so, you hear about this, and you hear about veterans saying, no, just be ready to come down off of those super, super high highs, and being very, very driven, and having someone tell you exactly how to get to your goals to normal life. So I was kind of prepped for that. Fortunately, I don't think I ever experienced that post-Olympic depression of having such a distinct purpose and then having it gone. And it's weird with a lot of people. It doesn't matter if they're crazy successful or not successful at the Olympic Games, they still kind of slide into that. And so I think being prepped mentally to kind of combat that helped. And then also, Robert, what you were saying earlier of, kind of having a well-rounded life kind of helped me get out of that. But all that being said, after the 2016 Olympic trials, I didn't make I was training to make Rio, and I missed the team. I had an awful 2016 year. I went from training 6 days a week, being around 40 people a day, around 40 people a day. My training group was about a dozen or so people, laughing all the time, working so hard for this common goal. Just having that camaraderie with your teammates and your coaches, and to just being at home. And I think that's something that everyone could relate to with the pandemic right now. A lot of people went from these large office settings where you have your social group, and then is at home in their office by themselves, not talking to anybody. And so that could be really difficult. So after 2016, what I did right away was I wrote my cookbook, and I was here in my office, which is where I am now, writing all day, and then going downstairs to the kitchen, testing recipes, going to the grocery store, and really not interacting with anybody. Like, I had my dogs, and I would have these full conversations with my dogs because I was so starved for human attention. And I think that's something that everyone could relate to right now. So that part of it was difficult. And also, just, it's so clear what you need to do when you're an athlete. You work hard, you keep your head down. You have a coach that kind of lays out the plan for you. You have your meets along the way. It fits onto a calendar. It's something that it's pretty easy. And then you get into real life and you're like, what the hell am I doing? I have no idea. You have to set these goals, and you have to set these stepping stones with no real outside input. So it's tough. It's really tough. But fortunately, I think I was fortunate in that I did it at a later stage of life, and I was much more prepared for it than if I was 23, or, when a lot of people tend to retire is in their early 20s. I was in my early 30s. So I had a little bit more life under my belt, and I was more mentally prepared for it.
I really appreciate that response. It's so poignant, and that kind of transition that, climbing down the mountain, like you said, Caitlin, is something that every athlete has to go through eventually, whether that's climbing down the mountain of an Olympic experience or climbing down the mountain of finishing your senior year of competing at Cal. Everybody has to hang up those metaphorical cleats or goggles one day. And everybody has to deal with that transition of identity and schedule and working in a team environment versus, doing things more on your own, like you spoke about. So I really appreciate that. But now I'd like to shift the conversation to your post-sports career, specifically as co-founder of Gaderian Wines. Can you tell us the story of how you got started in the wine industry after retiring from professional athletics?
Yes. So I started Gaderian Wines in 2017 with my business partner and winemaker and friend, Shayna Harding. So it's a 2-person company, and Joe and Caitlin have both been up and visited us, and it's really, really fun. Like it's something that I never once considered doing. I loved wine. I grew up just outside of Napa Valley. My parents were always into wine when I was younger, and still are. And I remember just being exposed to going to the vineyards, going wine tasting. I personally wasn't wine tasting as a child. I would just run around in the vineyards when they would, taste. And that was more acceptable in the early 90s than it is now. But yeah, I was always intrigued by it. So when I became of drinking age, I would go up to Napa, and I just wanted to learn about this thing that is that so many people love, and that I wanted to learn about the concept of terroir and learn about the different varietals and the history of wine. Like, it was really interesting to me, and it was just a passion outside of swimming. And people think, like, oh, how did you fit that into training? I had a glass of wine with dinner. I didn't have a bottle of wine with dinner. So it can fit into it can fit into training for the Olympics, believe it or not. But my friend and partner, Shayna, when she moved out to California, she's from Florida, but she was actually moving from New York, and she married one of my husband's teammates from Santa Barbara. And so I knew her, via my husband, and she got into the wine industry and just very quickly worked her way up. She went from cellar rat to, she was the enologist, and then she was the associate winemaker. Now she's the winemaker at Honeycutt, and she's just incredibly, incredibly talented. And I was always very complimentary of how much I admired how she started this and became so successful so quickly, so seemingly quickly. And I would just pick her brain and just say, like, oh my God, that is so cool. I wish I could do that. And when my husband and I were looking for houses to purchase in 2006, 2007, one of the houses we considered actually had vines. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what if we buy this house and then I just kill all these vines? And I remember telling Sheena, like, hey, you could take care of it and we can make wine together. And I guess that was enough to plant the seed in her head that we could, maybe do something down the road. And when she just sent me a text one day, hey, I'm ready to make a wine, and would you consider being my partner? And I said yes immediately. And then I was like, you didn't mean to text this Natalie, right? Because we've all texted the wrong Caitlin or the wrong Robert in our phone before. And totally. I was like, you can't take it back. And so I went into this industry and into this business completely blind. And that's where I've said this before, I think that's where the confidence of being a successful athlete and a successful student athlete at Cal really comes into play. Is it gives you a sense of confidence that you could figure it out as you go. And that was one of the mottos that Terry would always tell us: figure it out. And, you don't really want to hear it at the time when you're being told figure it out. But it is a really important lesson. You can figure it out as you go. You're a smart, capable person who is industrious, and I'm scrappy. I am a bit of a hustler. So I could figure this industry out as we go. And, it's been difficult, especially with the wildfires, which we've had every year, something that we can't control at this point. But just learning the business has been interesting. Learning the science of winemaking has been fascinating. Like, that part of it, I absolutely love. And then you make this wonderful product. And like I have, like, this is our latest right here. This is our 2019 Henry Ranch Cabernet. We bottled this last week, which is really exciting. Was in the barrel almost 2 years. So this has been in the making for a really long time. It's a practice in patience. Wine is not something that happens quickly. And there are factors that you could control, like the science of the winemaking and the work that you put into it and how you do it. But then, there's climate and there's the terroir and there's wildfires and there's, just so many things out of your control, and you just have to accept it and work around it. And it's a fun industry.
Natalie, that was an excellent description of all the wonderful atmospherics and so forth that make wine, so sexy and attractive. And you won't be surprised to know, for all the reasons you also previously mentioned, that our audience of Cal student athletes actually turns out quite a lot of entrepreneurs, self-motivated, people, go get them, figure it out, a little at a time. And some of them actually may be considering launching a wine label. So I'm just interested, based on what you've now learned, could you describe the collection of responsibilities in a wine business that are split between the owner and the winemaker, as it were, or the as you and Shayna sort of split all there is to do in an early stage business?
Yeah. So fortunately, Shayna is the winemaker, and she's also the winemaker at Honeycut, which is a custom crush facility located in St. Helena. So what that means is that small wineries like Gaderian use Honeycut's facilities to produce their wine, to produce and store their wine when it's in barrel. So that's how you kind of get through not having the capital to just build a production facility. Like that's insane. And we lease we have leases on our vineyards. So we don't own the vineyards themselves yet. Hopefully we will at some point. So you have these relationships with the growers, and then you have the relationship with the production facility. Fortunately, we have a foot in the door with Shayna being in charge of the production facility. And so she gets to really baby our wines, which is really great. Every single day. Otherwise, if you're a different winery who's going to go to Honeycut, you either visit the winery yourself or give directives to Shayna and her staff of what to do with your wine. And so that's kind of how that model works. There's a lot that goes into the TTB, so the Tax and Trade Bureau, of, what states you could ship to, what states you can't ship to, what could go onto your label is a big thing. You have to go through this whole process through COLA. Forgive me, I forget what that stands for. But of what you could put on your label. You can't put anything you want on your label. So Gaderian means, in Old English, it means to gather or bring together. And so initially our tagline was going to be drink together, because, you want to drink together around a table with a glass of wine and some food. Like that's how most wine is consumed, is with food and friends. And that didn't get approved. So it says made with love by Nat and Shayna instead. And that was approved. So there are all these like little things that you don't think would go into the business. And then it's the salesmanship of it all, selling to restaurants and shops and really making relationships with either their sommelier or their wine director or just the bartender. It really is different with each place, getting into grocery stores. And we finally just got a distributor in Southern California, which is really exciting because we're direct to consumer, probably 95%. With the pandemic, everything's direct to consumer now. But Yeah, there's a lot that goes into the business. And fortunately, Shayna had done it for so long for other people that she really knew exactly what she was doing and kind of held my hand through the bureaucracy. And then my side of things is getting the word out. I do the social channels. So I do the Instagram. I do the Pinterest ads. I do, so the graphic design part is not something I'm trained in, but I have learned along the way how to use Photoshop. I'm getting a lot better at it, but it's still incredibly frustrating sometimes because it's not an intuitive program. You really need to know what you're doing. But yeah, we split the responsibilities down, hopefully down the middle, and yeah, figure it out as we go.
Yeah, so. Let me recap. There's a whole bunch of interesting stuff in there for the aspiring wine entrepreneur in our audience. But so you mentioned some, prohibition era restrictions that, for example, limit what you can put on your wine label. I know they also limit the way you can market to consumers. There was this theory, I guess, that if winemakers were directly marketing to consumers, that somehow that would be dangerous for consumers. And so, distributors then became, an elemental and I think now a statutory requirement, right, for selling in many states to restaurants and to retailers. You can't just sell directly. Somehow that was supposed to be, is my understanding anyway, more safe for consumers. But in any case, there's this old adage. It used to be that you mentioned that you're using third-party crush pad, third-party caves. You're in a negociant business, which means that you're buying grapes from farmers. Like all of these things, reduce the overhead, reduce the hurdles to actually start a wine label. Is that a fair kind of summary of what you just said?
100%. And then actually another part of it is choosing, being very thoughtful in your growth. So we started, our first year, I think we made maybe 250 cases, maybe 200 cases total. And last year we lost a lot from the fires, but we were about 550 cases, I think, before. So in 2019. So being thoughtful. So having like that 10-year plan of, hey, in 10 years, we want to be around 3,000 cases or so. So having that behind us, we have our flagship wines. So our two flagships, what we started our company on, are Chenin Blanc and Pinot Noir. So those are our, the bread and butter. We have that we've based our portfolio around, and then we fill in the varietals with ones that we love personally. So, and not just what's trendy or what, we very thoughtfully choose our wines and stuff that we personally like to drink, and things that we know the consumer will enjoy. So we have 100% Petite Syrah that is single vineyard. It's amazing. And that's not something that you generally see. That's sold out right now. Shayna and I were we weren't fighting over the last 4 bottles, but we were definitely jockeying for who gets those. But we were completely sold out of that one. So being very thoughtful and not just going with the trend, because that's not what we're in this for. We're in this to make wine that we love and stuff that we could share with our friends and customers.
So I also want to explore just a little bit more. You mentioned a couple of terms in your description. You mentioned that you just recently got a distributor, and you mentioned the term direct to consumer. These are both really important for anybody who's ideas to understand when you're launching a wine business. So the 3 ways you can get to market in the first place are, through a retail shop, through a restaurant, or selling directly to a user. And the first 2 require a distributor, and it is not easy to get distribution. So how did you do it? And then when you get on the subject of direct to consumer in this answer, talk about how do you attract a a user to actually experience your wine? How do you find them? How do you attract them? How do you retain them?
That's a very good question. So we initially got our customers through friends, family, word of mouth. We started an email list in the beginning, just anyone that we thought would like wine, and sent an email like, hey, we're starting this brand. If you want to know more, sign up for our, what we call our insider list. And it's free. You just get information of releases and just interesting news. And we promise not to spam you. We promise not to send a bunch of emails, because who likes that? No one likes that. We get too many emails as it is. So we just send you the pertinent information, and follow us on our social channels. So we have our Instagram, our Facebook, and then our Twitter, but we don't really use Twitter. And Shayna started TikTok, but I don't know TikTok yet. But so that's kind of how we initially made the relationships. And then, the word of mouth thing is really great with wine. We got probably our best restaurant account through a friend of a friend who tasted our wine, loved it, brought it to a restaurant. And then we're in this restaurant group in Sacramento. So we're in Golden Bear and Crew and Hook and Ladder in Sacramento. And they just tasted it at a party and loved our Chenin Blanc and wanted to include it on their wine list, which was really great. And I forget the second part of your question. I tend to meander with my answers.
Well, so the other part was like, how do you get distribution? How did you guys manage that?
Yeah. Again, it was word of mouth. So, we were contacted by this guy who runs the Napa Valley Wine Project, and he has this really ambitious goal of visiting X amount of wineries, and he writes it on his blog, so Napa Valley Wine Project. And he loved our wine, loved our story of just two scrappy women in St. Helena, making this, what he considers great wine, thankfully. And he introduced us to a distributor in Southern California. And that's how it started. And we just got this distributor like in the past month. So that's really exciting. Otherwise, and then you end up paying, a commission to that person, and you get the sales. And when you sell to a restaurant or to a retail store, you sell at 50% of cost. So then that restaurant or retail store can mark it up to the cost of retail, and that's how they make their profit. So you do have to account for that you are selling at a much lower price point. But you're getting it out to the world and hopefully spreading the love and spreading your wines to more people than you could reach personally. So there is that consideration of, direct to consumer is more profitable for our small business, but we also want to reach more people, not necessarily the masses. We're not, we're not Mondavi. We don't produce like thousands and thousands and thousands of cases. We produce 500 cases a year.
Yeah, really well said. I just also wanted to clarify, when you said 50% of cost, what you really meant was 50% of retail is what you
retail. I'm sorry, 50% of retail. Sorry,
yes. Sell. So there's margin left for the retailers and so forth.
Yes.
And I've got one last question on the entrepreneur thread. But before we move on, I just wanted to thank you again for sponsoring the wine at the 2019 Hall of Fame induction banquet. We hope you'll come back this year in 2021 with that wonderful Cabernet. And then the last thing I want to talk about was sort of like the sort of unexpected risks of entrepreneurship. You mentioned, earlier in this conversation, the unexpected in Olympic training was injuries. And also even in high school was these injuries that came up at really inopportune moments. You also mentioned in this business that the fires were really unexpected risks of entrepreneurship that are just a part of your business. And this is metaphorically, this is really, consistent theme in entrepreneurship. Everybody, it's not always exactly fires per se, but, can you talk about what was in your mind when the fires began, and like, how did you react? How did you guys make it through that, and what happened?
It was really tough. 2020 is the fire that hit us the closest and the hardest. So there's been a wildfire, like I said, every year that we've had our wine, and we've been threatened by fires before, but never actually affected. And in 2020, there was that dry lightning storm. So anyone who's from California or knows California, we do not get lightning ever in the summer. Like, that just doesn't happen. And so there was this freak light storm in August that that started a bunch of fires, and all these fires grew into these two giant fires and really destroyed a lot of the valley. So it was very scary in that it was so close to our production facility and so close to our vineyards. And I mean, let's not forget all the people that were lost in this and all the houses. Like, I'm not going to minimize that, but me directly, it was very close to our vineyards and our production facility. And just to be clear, I don't own the production facility. Sometimes people get a little confused by that.
It's Honeycut,
we were
right?
just,
yes.
Honeycut.
Honeycut, Arkenstone. There's a number of these bigger brands that allow others, smaller brands, to use their facilities.
Yes. Sometimes when people visit, they're like, wow, you have all this. I'm like, no, I don't own this. So I want to be clear with that. So anyway, and especially with our Chenin Blanc, it is at least 50 years old, if not 80 years old. Our records only go back to 50 years. So it's this amazing old vine Chenin that if it burns down, it's gone forever. And we're not going to have anything like that in Napa for the next 50 years. So because there's so little Chenin in Napa Valley. When we started, there was like 7 acres. Recently, a couple people planted some more, but the point is, old vine Chenin, it's going to be gone forever if the fires destroy it. Fortunately, we were spared on our vineyards themselves, physically burning down. The smoke ruined our red wines. And for people who don't know much about the production of wine, you have the must. So the grapes and the skins all sit together and ferment together. And so when you have smoke damage, it just soaks into those skins. And so we lost all of our red for 2020 because of that. And we produced our whites and our rosé with like not even a press. We just, gravity is what pressed those wines so as not to extract any smoke from those. And so fortunately our vineyards didn't burn down. And then, unfortunately, Honeycut was pretty severely affected. So Shayna, bless her heart, she was working through the fires. Like, there were literal fires around her. And there were points where all the roads to Honeycut were shut down, and she was trying to get in. And I was like, Shayna, like, I appreciate that you're trying to take care of our wine and other people's wine, but like, don't get killed in this process. This is insane. And, she worked through it, and, Honeycut ended up losing one of their buildings. That as you drive up, there was this house in front, that's completely burned to the ground. The crush pad was destroyed. Some of the metal signs like melted. It got really hot. And if you look around, Honeycut itself, the forest that surrounds it is just charcoal twigs. It's pretty crazy. Like, I didn't know that the mountains behind Honeycut were like Rocky Mountains. I always saw all these trees, all these beautiful redwoods, and those are gone. So Honeycut got hit pretty hard, but it could have been a lot worse. Like, Meadowwood was just down the road, and their restaurant burned to the ground. Like, there are wineries that are just gone. So, we were affected, but not as badly as it could have been.
Yeah, good thing for caves. Glad, the wine was inside the cave and and safe. And just one quick little fun fact. Do you happen to know what the largest production of Chenin Blanc is in the world, or where it is, I should say?
Clarksburg, right?
Well,
is it?
It's actually
Clarksburg in U.S.
It's actually in South Africa, which Chenin Blanc was also the base for brandy. So when the Dutch East Indies Company was sending ships around the Horn of Africa, they decided that they needed to plant a lot of Chenin Blanc because they needed refills on brandy. So anyway,
it's interesting.
But I digress.
Yeah, they have. I think they do a lot of sparkling in South Africa of Chenin. The Napa Valley, for people that don't know it used to be all Chenin Blanc, and historically, and then they ripped it out and replaced it with Cabernet because Cabernet is king in Napa Valley. You could sell it for a lot more, and so there's so little of it left in Napa, but there's a lot of history with Chenin, and it can be a really interesting, lovely, aromatic white if you know what you're doing with it.
Yeah, well, I want to continue this entrepreneurial discussion here because I've read about your passion with food and cooking, and this interest should come as a surprise to none of our listeners since wine paired with food as a final ingredient to dishes is well covered in mainstream cooking shows and pretty much everywhere, actually. Speaking of which, you were a judge on Iron Chef America and competed in Food Network's Chopped. And I even read that you raise chickens and you have a vegetable garden in your backyard, which implies a chef's interest in fresh ingredients. And in 2019, you published your cookbook called Cook to Thrive. Now, let's focus on this. Can you describe for us the genesis and thesis of your cookbook, which seems like it attempts to blend an athlete's nutrition with haute cuisine, and how the whole process of writing and publishing your book unfolded?
That the process of the cookbook was so interesting. It's a much longer process than I ever anticipated. It was about 2.5 years, which seems nuts to me. So in 2016, let me back up. I always had this idea, like I wanted to do a cookbook, and a lot of, my social Twitter or Instagram was all about food. Like that's, if I'm not swimming, it's always about food. I love food. I live to eat. And, people would always say, like, when are you going to do a cookbook? And it's something that I never really considered doing. And then I started thinking about it. And my idea was to share my stories of training, travel, and competition through a cookbook. So using the cookbook as a way to share some of my stories. And, when you think of food and memories, or when you think of a lot of times when you travel somewhere, you think about the meals that you had or the little snacks along the way. And when you eat something, it immediately brings you back to that time in your life. And so food and the aromas of the food really tie in with memories. And so that was kind of the idea of telling these stories about my swimming through food. And after the 2016 quadrennium, that's how swimmers think in quads, I thought about, that next step. I want to write a cookbook. So in December of 2016, I met with a bunch of publishers in New York, and Clarkson Potter is my publisher, and they were the ones that got it. Everyone else, they're like, okay, so you want to do healthy recipes, right? Like it's all going to be healthy, whatever healthy means. That's such a charged definition that even dietitians can't really define a lot of times. It's something that's a moving target, it seems like, but a lot of publishers wanted me to do stuff that could help you lose weight and that could help you do this. And that's not the point. The point is a lifestyle. And Clarkson Potter got it because I wanted to share, whatever healthy recipes mean, the recipes that I was eating when training for the Olympic Games or competing at Olympics or World Championships. And then the family recipes and just the recipes that I enjoy making. And so the stuff that I would actually eat throughout my entire year, not just when I want to, look good or right when I'm competing. Like the point is you have this whole life where you have to fuel yourself throughout the day. And, you want to enjoy what you're eating, whether, it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner. You don't want to just mindlessly put it in your mouth and then move on. Like, you want to enjoy it. And so that was kind of the whole point of the book.
I'm actually working on writing a book right now too, not a cookbook, but a book. And I think it's something that our student athlete listeners and recent alumni or even older alumni might be interested in doing. So I'm curious, do you have any insider tips that you can share to pitching books to publishers, marketing it? Is there anything that surprised you about this whole process? I know you talked about the length of publishing a book, but like building an email list, like, did you have to put a lot of effort into that? And, how did you craft your book proposal to these publishers? And, how did you develop your marketing when you eventually launched this book? Can you describe that process for us?
Yeah. So let's back up. Let me give you the timeline of writing a cookbook. It's crazy. So I sold it in 2016, in December of 2016. And then the manuscript itself was due, in September of 2017. And then we did photography by the spring of 2018, and then turned in the finished manuscript by the summer, early fall of 2018. And then it was published in 2019. That is such a long timeline that it's kind of nuts. And the reason is cookbooks, you either release in the spring or the fall, and generally new authors you want to release in the spring. The fall is when they reserve for, the Ina Gardens and the Martha Stewarts and the people who are really established cookbook authors. So the newbies are in September. So you kind of have to fit into that timeline somewhere. And so when you meet that initial step of meeting with publishers, you have to have your book proposal. And I remember talking to my book agent who I had prior to all this, and he was telling me, you need to write a book proposal. Okay, what is that? I don't know what that is. I have this idea in my head, but nothing's written on paper. Generally, the book proposal is the first few chapters of your book to kind of lay out the overall tone and direction where you're going. And that didn't make any sense to me because I'm not writing a novel. I'm writing a cookbook. So what do you do? And so for me, it was writing the introduction, sharing a bunch of recipes and stories, and that's what I sold to the publishers. And selling yourself is something that is challenging when you're in a room with people. My sports agent always said, imagine you just had a glass of wine. So you just, you take away those initial inhibitions, just pretend like you had a glass of wine and you are that gregarious person. I am a very social, introvert, if that makes sense. So I'm someone who's capable of speaking with people and interacting, but at heart, I'm an introvert. When you are selling yourself, you kind of have to just act as if and pretend that you're not this introverted person and pretend that, you're the life of the party. And somehow you end up being a little bit more social than you would be otherwise, if that makes any sense.
Anderson Cooper talked about that on live television not that long ago, about his own, sort of natural instincts, and what he has to do to be a TV anchor.
Yeah, it's this interesting thing where, in life, I'm not a shut-in by any sense of the word, but I am much more introverted. And I think that sometimes that doesn't come across in interviews such as this, because, you are three people that are easy to talk to, but, and then you're asking me questions about myself, anyone could talk about themselves. Right. But, you kind of have to push through that. And the acting as if really works in so many different facets of life. Just pretend you're that successful person that you're trying to be, and somehow you will become that person.
I also have a follow-up question on this, because I know you mentioned you have a sports agent, but did you also hire a literary agent? Can you talk about if that's even important to getting a publisher's attention?
Yes. So I have a book agent. And yeah, I don't think I would have sold the book otherwise. So, I found one through my agency, through my sports agency. So, my sports agent is with Octagon, which is a large sports agency. So they have, all these different resources, and that's how I found my book agent.
Yeah, well, excellent. I know I'm definitely using these notes and this guidance in my process. But on that note, I want to shift to this intangible benefits, the thousands of hours that you invested in the pool, training, swimming, competing. We talked a little bit about it earlier, and you talked about chipping away at large goals, visualizing your schedule, what you're about to do, and focusing in when going gets tough. But our audience is very interested whether the sensibilities developed as an athlete are transferable to post-sports careers. So for that, I'm going to turn this over to Caitlin.
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite parts. We've been doing these spotlighting interviews, and I love just hearing from our alumni in terms of what from the athletic or the student athlete experience just is really, hit home and been just something you've taken away and really helped you in kind of this real life civilian life after sport experience. So I'm curious, I already have heard you've shared kind of, Rob shared some of them, but just teamwork with Shayna, managing what's in your control, the figuring it out mentality, being a hustler. But what are maybe some other stories that you can bring to life for current student athletes of times when you were an athlete and lessons you learned that now, in your kind of real life, every day, working on the cookbook or at the vineyard or in motherhood life, what are some of these lessons that have really rung through for you and how have they showed up?
God, there are so many. It's really tough to choose one. In motherhood, I'm sure you could, agree with this, is just really being in the moment, which is so hard when you have when the days seem so long. You're how am I going to entertain this 2-year-old or this 6-month-old for the next 4 hours? Oh my God, can we just get to a nap time? It's that part of man, this span of time seems so long, but you could be present in the moment. And so, what I learned from swimming, kind of going back to that earlier part of the conversation of swimming can be so grueling and so in your own head, and the practices are long. And if you really are present in what you're doing, it actually helps you get through that time period. And with kids, they grow up so fast. It's so, everyone who has kids knows this, and it's something that you really, you understand it a little bit until you have your own, and then you're now I really get it. I really get how, the days are long, but the years are short. And I only have my oldest is only 2.5. Just being present and really trying to take it in, is something that I've tried to apply to motherhood. And then, the other part of the wine industry and being ready for the unexpected is the ability to pivot. That's really, really important. So when the fires happened last year, we weren't going to make a red Pinot Noir or Merlot or a Cabernet Sauvignon for 2020. That wasn't going to happen, unfortunately. We had to accept that. And instead we did a ton of rosé, which has in previous years has always sold out. We've won awards for our rosé. So we made a lot of rosé in 2020. So with the devastation of losing all of our red wine, we made much more rosé than we ever have before, which is selling quite well. And so you have to just, accept your losses as they come and then pivot and then see how you could be successful. And Caitlin, were you on the trip when we had a bus breakdown on the way to the airport? I think in Barcelona.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Like there are things that just happen in sport where you like something happens and you're like, all right, we have to go, we have to get to the meet, or we have to get to the airport, and you just kind of figure it out as you go, and you have to, pivot, and maybe what you envisioned the next week of your life being, it's going to be a little different, and you have to be flexible and willing to change. And so there are just so many times in my career where things didn't go quite my way. And your attitude really is important when things don't go your way. You could sit and feel sorry for yourself, or you could see a path forward. So you could learn from your experience and see a path forward.
Hey, speaking of learning, I just want to pick up on something. Caitlin, you're going to probably say something too, but you mentioned, Natalie, early your experience of coming to Cal, which sounds like you may have come in there with a little bit of a fixed mindset, a lot of extra confidence, and then Terry kind of broke it down and maybe put you into more of a growth mindset, which really allowed you to, do well as a swimmer, get to your maximum potential, but also to, learn as a winemaker and figure it out as you go, and like not be intimidated by the learning, that you're going through at the moment. Is there anything to that, or am I just reaching?
There is. Terry didn't break me down. I was just broken when I got to Cal. I showed up kind of broken, and then she nursed that little broken bird into what I am today. What was the question? Sorry, I got like.
Well, I was there's Caitlin's down at Stanford, so she's going to know about this. Right. But there's a professor at Stanford named Carol Dweck who wrote a book called Mindset. And it's talked about a lot in the context of, confidence and how do you sort of achieve your maximum potential. And a lot of it has to do with, just being open to learning and and the idea that you can always grow and
the growth mindset. Yes. Yeah. Yes. 100%. And I've told kids this all the time. Like whenever we have given, the collective, Caitlin and I, and other professional athletes, whenever we've given motivational talks, a lot of times they're like, what's the number one thing you've learned in your career? And for me, it has been that every obstacle is an opportunity, to learn. If you have that growth mindset, to use your terminology. So that injury, how do I grow from that injury? Well, I improve my technique, and I learn more about my body, and I apply that so that I don't break down. I make sure that I am moving functionally as much as possible. So there are things that you could learn from injury, even illness, just things that don't go your way. And if you have the right attitude about them, you could learn and get better. A lot of times, a lot of athletes and a lot of just people, something happens and you dwell and you feel sorry for yourself and you don't have that growth mindset. And then, so nothing comes of it. And, it's not like I didn't dwell at times on my injuries and feel sorry for myself. I certainly did. I am human. But if you step back and look, okay, honestly, how can I learn from this? How can I make myself better? How can I get myself out of this hole, this metaphorical hole? Then you figure a way out of it. And then in the long term, you are better because of it. And then now, 20 years later, I can look at that labral injury and missing the Olympic team in 2000 as the single best thing that happened in my career. And at the time it was devastating. But if I made that Olympic team in 2000, I would have been happy just calling myself an Olympian. I would have showed up to Cal being, overconfident, stubborn swimmer who probably wouldn't have accepted Terry's teachings. And probably, I don't even think I would have made it all 4 years, to be honest, at Cal. And then because I was so broken down when I got there, I was open to any experience with Terry, and I was going to try something new and just see what happened and learn from it. And then, I got 12 medals out after that devastating injury and missing the Olympic team. So yeah, you have to have that mindset of, okay, I'm torn down, but how am I going to learn from this, and how am I going to make myself better?
Coughlin, did you have another following question you wanted to ask her?
I was going to go down memory lane a little bit, but I think that was a beautiful, segment. And I would say the one thing that I mentioned at the beginning, I've learned a lot from Natalie. And I actually think I got the huge privilege, I think, of actually seeing Natalie on a daily basis and go through these micro fails on a daily basis, whether it be practices not going the right way, or we would go to these swim meets all over the world, really. And some of the races were great and some of them weren't. And it's so easily looking at someone like Natalie to think she won 12 medals, everything's gone perfectly. But in reality, I've gotten to see Natalie, kind of stumble a lot and then figure out how to fight and pick herself up and then continue to do that. Whether it's, getting a book published or figuring out a way to navigate, with tough fires in a winery. I think there's just that repeated kind of fight and resiliency and willingness to just go all in. And it's just been so fun to watch and kind of see that in kind of real life as well as athletics.
No, you're so right, Kayla. I mean, this is the myth of overnight success that you're talking about. And there's a million examples we could cite. Michael Jordan got cut from his high school basketball team, blah, 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 blah. Athletes who've spent a lot of time, on the field or excelling to the highest levels know that that's a myth. That it's, the pathway is continuous daily improvement, setbacks, difficulty, regardless of, if you get to some place as high as Natalie got, or anywhere along the way. But okay, so Natalie, I got our last question for you here. We touched on this earlier, but as you know, 98% or so of the student athletes at Cal go pro in something other than their sport when they graduate from Cal, and then the other 2% ultimately do so after a pro career. And we've heard from this group poignantly that the transition of self-identity from athlete to civilian to sort of the post-sports can be really, really hard. People have described feeling untethered, deeply uncertain about who they'll become, and how life will unfold, what the first steps are to take and so forth. And I know you went through this a little later in life and wasn't quite as, immediate for you, but we're just wondering if you had any general advice, as your mature self now, you've got a couple of kids, you're on the other side of this, what would you recommend? What would you say to your 22-year-old self? What guidance would you give?
Be prepared. It's going to end at some point. And whether people like to hear that or not, if you do go on to the pros, whatever that means in your sport, it will still end at some point, and then you have this life. And so to imagine what that's going to be like, and really imagine how you want that life to look, and just wrap your mind around it. A lot of times, the reason that, I was talking about that post-Olympic depression, that people go through that initially is when you are training for something, whether it's football or swimming, you are just so highly, highly focused and in that mode of being successful in that one tiny realm. And you're not even willing to consider that either you're not going to make that Olympic team, or you're not going to make that the NFL or the NBA or whatever. You don't consider the alternative because you don't want to even that to enter into your mind. What I'm saying is, whether you make that Olympic team or that NBA or NFL team or whatever, it still is going to end at some point. So you have to visualize it and kind of plan that, you're going to have a life out of this. And so just start to identify what passions you have, what skills you have, and figure out what your life may look like. But then also be flexible. I never thought I was going to be a vintner and own a winery, but here I am. But it's all these lessons that I learned from being a student athlete and being a professional athlete that have allowed me to be successful in this business.
You've got this great line in our video that we made that tried to sort of capture the essence of Cal athletics and our letter winners. You said something to the effect of it's really about the long game. And so like what you just said really, really captured that. So thank you for that. That was great.
Thank you.
Natalie, how can our listeners follow and reach you?
The easiest is Instagram. I'm on at Natalie Coughlin, and I also run Gaderian Wines. So at Gaderian Wines, Gaderian Wines, and then nataliecoughlan.com.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you for joining this podcast today. I also want to share personally that sensibility you shared to really focus in on hard work, not let yourself zone out. I've explained it on the podcast before, but I broke my neck 4 years ago, competing in the Collegiate Rugby National Championship, lost my ability to move. And over the last 4 years, I've been dedicating myself to be able to walk again. And it's a struggle. It's difficult. And I read and heard you talking about that stuff and started implementing it into my workouts. And it's just made like a profound difference, like better results, more enjoyable. So I want to thank you for that, but I want to thank you for all of the experiences and insights you shared with us today. Our student athlete listeners and our young alumni will be able to reference this for years to come and get so much value out of it. So Natalie, thank you so much for being here today. Go Bears.
Go Bears. And that was wonderful. Thank you.